stranger. I can tarry but a night. There the glory is ever shining. Oh, my longing heart is there. Here in this country, so dark and dreary, I long have wandered, forlorn and weary. I'm a pilgrim, and I'm a stranger. I can tarry but a night. There's the city to which I journey. My Redeemer is its light. There is no sorrow, nor any sighing, nor any tears there, nor any dying. I'm a pilgrim, and I'm a stranger. I can tarry but a night.
Sweet are the tidings that greet the pilgrim's ear as he wanders in exile from home. Soon, soon will the Savior in glory appear, and soon will the kingdom come. The mossy old graves where the pilgrims sleep shall be opened as wide as before, and the millions that sleep in the mighty deep shall live on this earth once more.
He's coming, coming, coming soon, I know, coming back to this earth again, and the weary pilgrims will to glory go when the Savior comes to reign.
There will meet ne'er to part in our happy Eden home. Sweet songs of redemption will sing. From the north, from the south, all the ransom shall come and worship our heavenly King.
He is coming, coming, coming soon, I know, coming back to this earth again, and the weary pilgrims will to glory go when the Savior comes to reign. Hallelujah, amen.
All right, here we go. Welcome, Jonathan Zirkle.
Thank you.
Good to see you tonight. And we've both been doing a little bit of traveling here and there, but we were able to get this going. So good. Welcome back. And we want to talk about religious liberty as an evangelistic, opportunity. I actually put together some disclaimers. Like these are my own opinions. Your opinions may not be mine, but there's probably some commonality since I asked you to come. These are not necessarily the opinions of my employing entity or my church, my whatever. But anyway, here we go. So there's our little business here. Type in your comments if you're interested, and we'd like to try to take a go at any questions or comments you have. But welcome back, Jonathan. And we have a church with all kinds of departments and details and bits that are organized. And we have a lot of opportunities that God gives us. And we thought that tonight we might look at religious liberty as one of those opportunities. For people who may not know, you've spent considerable energy as a lawyer defending church members and persons in need of religious liberty help. You've done that over and over again, and so we are glad to have you on board for tonight. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, what about that? Is religious liberty an opportunity? Maybe one that we're not taking full advantage of as a church. We have our Liberty Magazine campaign, each year, and we send subscriptions of Liberty Magazine to the mayor and every other, local kind of thought leader, I guess. I don't know how many read it. But we have that campaign, and there was probably a time when that was a bigger and more powerful thing. I'm not sure how powerful it is today, but I know we still do that in our local churches. But not every church is rip-roaring on religious liberty. And so anyway, let's talk a little bit about the religious liberty in the church tonight, and possibly how we can employ it individually or hopefully in our congregations also. Is it a viable outreach? Are people curious and interested in this today, Jonathan, or is this something passé, something from long ago that doesn't really matter?
Oh, I think there's a huge amount of interest in this today, and I also think in how you present it, you can interest a lot of people in ways that you may not expect. We can get into that here in a second, but I think that this is probably one of the most exciting times to be interested in this sort of thing. Up until COVID, I suppose I'm not supposed to use the C word here. Maybe I hope the algos don't pick any of that up. But basically, that changed America a lot, and people are waking up and they're considering different things. I think if you'd have talked to me 10 or 15 years ago, I would have said, there's no way religious liberty is going to be a big issue in this country. I look at it and I'm all, I just look at the court and the different things that have been happening, and it just didn't seem viable. And the only reason why I had any interest in religious liberty, say 15 years ago, was purely because of the Adventist teachings on end times. And it was purely because I knew from a theological prophetic standpoint that this was going to be relevant. However, fast forward to today, and everybody can see that this could be an issue. At least, if not everyone, at least the thinking people, the people that are kind of watching, And if anything, this latest incident with Charlie Kirk has just brought that even further to the forefront. And so
there's people talking about there being really a measurable, substantial increase in interest in Christianity among young people immediately following the tragic events with the murdering of Charlie Kirk. So yes. We're in an unusually interesting time on this in a certain way, sadly, but God can bring good out of very dark things.
Well, and you can also see there's another little piece of the discussion that I'm just shocked that we're even hearing. And that is the Protestant versus Catholic. After Charlie Kirk was killed, Candace Owens, came out and said that he was converting to Catholicism, which then immediately brought kind of an uproar in the opposite direction. And all of a sudden I think that little event created a situation where at least some people are going like, what's the difference? Because we've gone so ecumenical in this country, and people that are kind of like, what do we call them? The knots, the people that don't have a religion. And they have a very hard time seeing that there may be any difference between Catholicism and Protestantism. And so I think that all of these things have happened. And when you start to ask the question about the difference between Catholicism and Protestantism, especially in the context of government and politics, which is what people are doing. I mean, let's face it, Charlie was very involved in politics. When you start asking that question there, then you're right into the religious liberty, because the religious liberty issues really are one of the main characteristics that differentiate between Protestantism, Catholicism, and really, sadly, it's not just Protestantism. We can talk more about this in a second, but it depends on what area of Protestantism you're in as to whether or not how you feel about religious liberty.
That's true. In some respects, the religious liberty, liberal Protestantism, if we want to call it that element of Protestantism seems as though it's been captured or nullified. Maybe I shouldn't use the word language nullified, but it doesn't seem that active. But let's work from this point. Help our viewers understand the difference between a truly Protestant type look at religious liberty and a Catholic look at religious liberty. How do those things vary in substance? I mean, you would think that the Protestants would have great clarity and a vehement, carefulness about keeping church and state separate. And yet it seems as though a lot of Protestants are shrugging their shoulders, and the state in their mind is still, it's like they're living in 1980 or something. I don't know, not that it was perfect then, I suppose, either, but the church is
1680.
The state is the 1680. The state is the neutral referee that's going to protect all of our freedoms for us, rather than maybe a much different relation that really Christianity has with the state today, with secular type themes coming in and being pushed in, and Christianity sort of being reshaped and remolded very largely. But anyway, I asked you, I'll stop chattering, the difference between a Catholic perspective on religious liberty and a Protestant one. That seemed like that would be a massive thing if there is a difference. Tell us about that difference so that we can clear our brains.
Sure. Well, you have to kind of, I like to tell it in the context of history. I think it's easiest to understand. And if you look in Europe, the heart of Christianity, where Catholicism was, I should say the heart of Catholicism, the Protestant Reformation breaks out around 1517. And it breaks out over a number of different issues, but it isn't really, how can I say, obviously there's disagreements involved, and so there's kind of an intrinsic need for a certain amount of religious liberty, but basically what happened is that a lot of early Protestantism actually adopted the same views as Catholicism. And so basically that view was no religious liberty. Basically the view was whatever the king is, you are too. So that's the baseline. Whatever the king is, you are too. And you can see that in England. We're most familiar with that. You have this kind of went back and forth. You got Bloody Mary, who was Catholic and tried to kill the Protestants, and then you kind of go back and forth. And it's not just one side that's doing that, sadly. But what's going on in the background, and this actually gets started very early in Protestantism, is you have the Anabaptists going. When the Anabaptists come along, these are a branch of Protestantism that was a smaller piece, but they got the religious liberty thing right from the very beginning. And so you got these two brands of Protestantism, and then you come to America. And the reason why the Christians came to America was because, they wanted religious freedom, but it started out with them wanting just a place where they could have their leaders be of their same religious ilk, and then they would have that religion. So you take Massachusetts, it was Puritan, and the Puritans came over because they wanted to get away from the established Church of England so that they could worship freely. But you had to be Puritan to go to Massachusetts. So you didn't have religious liberty in Massachusetts. What you had was liberty to be a Puritan, where in England you didn't have liberty to be a Puritan. And then Roger Williams comes along, and he's the first guy that comes along who's like not in that straight line of Anabaptists. He starts to mainline the idea that we should have religious liberty. And so what he does is he sees that, look, these are questions of the heart, and that the government should have nothing to do with it. So he's the first guy that gets to implement separation of church and state. And then that idea caught on with all the denominations. And it sort of became a practical issue because if you got 13 colonies, some of them were Puritan, one of them's Catholic, essentially, and you got some of them that are already very much religious liberty oriented, like Rhode Island, Pennsylvania have always been very much religious liberty oriented. And you got these different things. Some of them are Church of England and that kind of thing. And all of a sudden they come together, 13 colonies, and they're going to try to have some unity. And so it becomes very practical to see that you actually need to have religious liberty. But it's easy to discount this as being some kind of a practical compromise. Well, there's certainly an element to that. If you look at the work of Roger Williams, you see the absolute foundation of a theological basis for this. And so the churches actually grew and changed. And, this is a time when the Baptist church in America is just starting to take off and just starting to grow. And the Baptist church in America then is one of the largest Protestant organizations. And that's definitely in the line of Roger Williams, Roger Williams is getting a lot of his ideas from the Anabaptists. So it's definitely in that line of religious liberty. And so you have then, we can call it the Catholic versus Protestant view, but we need to recognize, I think this is really important, to recognize that there is a Protestant view that has an identical view of religious liberty as Catholicism. And so what I think we're going to see going on in this country is there's going to be an argument over which view. You can take a Catholic view, or you can take a certain kind of Protestant view. And that would be the early Protestant view. That would be the Protestant view of the Puritans. It would also be the Protestant view of the Calvinists. Early Calvinism. Calvinism was, as far as Protestants go, Calvinism was burning more heretics at the stake than any other Protestant group. I don't think it got to the same levels as what Catholicism was doing during the Inquisition, but there's no question that was going on. And so if you look back, say, to Luther, and you look back to Calvin, you don't see religious liberty. You have to look back to Roger Williams if you want to see it. And like I said, the beauty of it is that what happened with Protestantism is they're developing theology as they come out of the Catholic Church. There's a lot of theology that's developed that into many areas, it's not just in religious liberty. And so it should be no surprise that concepts of religious liberty also developed over time. And
wouldn't you say that the Catholic, because the Catholic viewpoint sort of sees the church, so to speak, over the state, they're coming from a very different place in their concepts of religious liberty, whereas the Anabaptist and the Baptist, that stream, the Radical Reformation stream, is coming from kind of a very negative line about human government, about Constantine, and power coming down from on high and forcing you to do certain observances. That they're trying to go back to the New Testament, go back to the Bible, and try to make sure what we're doing is actually Bible stuff, from the early church, and throw out the trash that's accumulated. So the Anabaptist version of religious liberty is, don't tread on my conscience, church or state. Whereas the Catholic version of religious liberty is like, we're ultimately in charge here, but we're going to use the state for our own ends. And I don't know, maybe that's not the way you were going to frame it, but that's maybe
no, I think I think that's a good way to frame it. And what you have is a situation in Catholicism where the Pope says, I make the kings, so I tell the king what to do, essentially. And then you move into Puritanism. And what Puritanism said was you had to be a member in good standing of the Puritan church to participate in civil life. So if you weren't a member in good standing, you couldn't vote, you couldn't hold office, and other things you couldn't do. And so that's more the that's what I would say is the Protestant iteration of that. When you get rid of a pope, but you still want to have what can I say, religious oppression. So, yeah. This is the scary thing, and this is why I see this as kind of like why this is so relevant to
Williams.
What's that?
What you're talking about is pre-Roger Williams.
Yeah, correct. Well, it's what Roger Williams was fighting. I mean, Roger Williams essentially left Puritanism. If you look at the course of his life, he essentially became a Baptist. But what I was going to say is if you look at the rhetoric that's going on in America today, the rhetoric is very much what was being said during the time of Roger Williams with the Puritans. They're looking back to this time in America and American history when we were Christian. When we were Christian, I put that in air quotes, because this whole question about being Christian or not being Christian, that's a whole nother huge can of worms that we probably don't have time for tonight. But they're looking back towards that, and you hear some of these folks saying, well, the church needs to tell the state what to do, which is exactly what Puritans did. And so they quote things, the city on the hill, that sermon gets quoted, which is a Puritan sermon, and things like that. So what they're doing is they're looking back to 1630 or whenever the Puritans really established themselves around. Actually, it's more like 1633, something like that. Anyway, they're looking back to that period, and they're skipping the history that happened, say, from about 1650 and all the way to 1776. It's like they just skip that. And it's like, are you kidding me? And that's actually why I think this is an exciting time to be doing religious liberty, because we are at a time where almost the only thing you have to do to preach religious liberty is just preach American history. It's a beautiful thing. So anyway.
Well, and America was a nation without a king and a church without a pope.
Yeah.
And that's kind of coming again from that Anabaptist perspective.
Right.
But today it's like, well, let's blend to the maximum our church and state stuff, and don't worry, it'll be okay. But I'm not convinced it's going to be okay.
So I'm starting to do more research, and I have to admit, I am the product of recent American education, right? And in the recent American education, I took a lot of history courses, but there's an old saying, he who controls the past controls the future, right? Well, there may be some truth to that, but you look at the history textbooks and the way the classes were taught to me is that they weren't taught from a religious perspective. And so I'm having to go back and kind of relearn American history with the religious issues kind of like mixed in a little bit. And and in the process, I'm learning things like William Penn is someone who I'm studying right now, and I'm going to admit right off the bat, there's a lot more for me to know. And so please forgive me, anyone who's listening to this who knows more about William Penn than I do, but I'm getting there. But he comes and he establishes Philadelphia. And one of the things that he wanted to do with Philadelphia was he wanted this to become the leading city in America. I think when he founded Philadelphia, Boston, New York, they'd only really been going as cities for about 50 years before he actually started Philadelphia, something like that. I have to go back and, like I said, please, if I misstate something, if there's a historian that knows better on this, I'm learning it, right? So anyway, he wants to have this. He wants his city to be the leading city in America, and he really gave New York a run for its money. And if you don't believe me, look at things like, where's the Liberty Bell and what happened there in Constitution Hall? This is Philadelphia. It's not New York, right? And so, and the thing that is really interesting about Penn and what happens in Philadelphia is that he comes along and he implements the same kind of religious liberty that Roger Williams did in Rhode Island. In other words, pretty much absolute religious liberty. And because of that, he becomes very, very prosperous. It gives Philadelphia a chance because Philadelphia is so much better as far as religious liberty goes. And I was listening to this one. It was really interesting. I decided to just listen to this. It was a YouTube video. It was for people that were going to give. It was for tour guides of Philadelphia. And this old tour guide there's talking, and he says, I lead these people around Philadelphia, and sometimes he says, especially, I think he was talking about his Asian guests, the tourists that he was leading. He says, they'll ask me this question: why are there so many churches in Philadelphia? He says, it's because Roger Williams gave religious freedom, religious liberty. And when you start to think about it, it's really interesting because Philadelphia had the best religious liberty of anywhere in the United States. And yet what prospers in Philadelphia more than anywhere else in the United States? Churches. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it is.
And when you look at it, it's like, people will say things like, "Oh, if we don't have the state supporting the church, we won't have any church." No, it actually goes the opposite direction. And Philadelphia, in our own history, we can show that. And it's interesting because when I study history, I will bump into these statements from people like Benjamin Franklin, another guy from Philadelphia, who says, the church does best when it does not have support of the state. And he's living it. He can see it right there. He's not just saying that because he wants to be, some people will say, well, of course, Benjamin Franklin's going to say that. He's a deist, right? But no, he's actually seeing this happen right in front of his eyes.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like James Lindsay is a personality on X.com, Twitter, and his book, Critical Theories, really is an insightful book about, a lot of the critical race theory and all that kind of stuff that's been happening these recent years. But he's very much an atheist, and yet he has become quite an advocate, and especially in recent time, of he's talked to a lot of churches and talking to them about some of these kinds of issues, even though he doesn't come from a faith perspective. But even he can see that religious freedom is rooted in a Christian background, and that it's better for everybody for there to be, conscientious liberty and religious freedom. That's an urgent piece. Without that, I don't think we even have Western civ as we know it. So to come back around to what you were saying when we began this podcast tonight, we're looking at opportunities that we might have to as Christians, as last day Christians, to use the religious liberty to take advantage of the interest that's there. I mean, why not? Why wouldn't we? To get people interested again in a Christian perspective on life, in the all the benefits that flow from a conscientious liberty position, a freedom position. Why wouldn't we do that? And we have like every conference. We have 59 conferences, for example, in North America, groupings of churches that are kind of grouped into sisterhoods of churches that are grouped into other groupings. But anyway, as you boil it down and go down the chain, you get to the 59 conferences. Each of those conferences has a religious liberty leader in that conference. Each church in that conference has a localized religious liberty leader in that church, presumably. But I don't know how active or how much advantage we are taking of this theme of religious liberty. And yet I do agree with you. We're in a time when a lot of people are thinking about this, asking questions, noticing vast changes all around them. And yet I don't know if we're taking the right kind of advantage of that. Again, that's probably the wrong language for it, but are we meeting the interest, or are we just kind of plodding along and doing the same same old stuff we've kind of always done, when we have great opportunities here potentially to share the Christian faith and how much of a benefit that is for people to have conscientious liberty.
Yeah, so I think that that's really important. And I think that one of the things that you need to be able to do if you want to do religious liberty work right now as an evangelistic tool is you need to be able to bridge the gap between just giving a explanation of American history to true Christianity. And I would like to actually address that, I think, before I talk about the local churches as you've raised the issue. And that is this.
All right, go for it.
When you're showing this, and like, let's say you've just talked about Philadelphia and how it flourishes when it has religious liberty. And the big question is why? Why is that? Because it seems like you should just be able to pass laws and make it so, and maybe it would flourish better if it has the state helping it. I think that this is the perfect segue that a person can use. And I'm not saying this is the only way, but this is a way that I've been starting to use with people that I talk to. Is you can say, well, why is that? It says, well, there's a couple things going on. If you look at Christianity, it's based on consent. And if you look at the word worship, if you look up the word worship, and if you look up the word love, in fact, I did this where I looked up not the definitions, but I looked up the synonyms and the antonyms, and I think maybe it was in the definitions. It had these related words, right? And I was going down the list, and the difference between worship and love, there's almost no difference between those two words, except worship is something that you give towards someone who's a deity, God, right? But love is someone you give to an equal. But they're very, very, very similar, and so it can't be forced. And so that goes, okay, so there has to be consent. You can't force somebody into religion. So law is not the right tool, because law is a implement of force. And so then there's one more thing that I think is important to say. It's like, well, why is it? Why did God make it this way? I mean, what did God make anyway? And we can get into scripture. He says, in scripture, it says he's going to write his law upon our heart. Well, but he can only do that if we consent. And so if you ask the state to run the religion, you end up with slaves. Slaves don't consent to love their masters. I mean, some might, but most of them won't, right? And so that's not how it has to work. People have to consent, and they have to enter into a love relationship, or else worship doesn't work, because it's all the same thing. And so I think at that point, you can start to make the argument to the person who is maybe trying to promote Christianity through law, that maybe the only way to promote Christianity is through personal evangelism, whether that be with the church or just straight personal evangelism. And I've started to try to think more in terms of straight up personal evangelism. The church is a great place to bring people. I'm not saying that I'm not into that, but I think sometimes you need to be really careful and approach people for exactly where they are when you're talking to them. And with this religious liberty thing, you can kind of put forth this idea of what made America great was religious liberty. You want to make America great again? Be sure you keep track of the religious liberty. This is key. This is really, really important, because this is the source of all of our freedoms. But then if you want to make America great, you can look at John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, and they're saying, well, we need a moral people. We need Christians. Otherwise, it doesn't really work if you have a democracy of pagans, right? And you can agree with them. That's 100% right. But guess what? The way it works is consent, love. And so that's the way it works. And so you can't legislate it. It's sort of like the military general who says, I'm going to issue an order that there'll be no more yellow fever in camp. It's like, good luck. That's not how you get rid of yellow fever. You can't pass an order on that. So what I think is that once you get that vision as to how you can actually use religious liberty for the purposes of evangelism, I mean, you could take it one step further, and this is something that I've tried to do, and I will be doing this again soon. I've got a couple churches that are interested in it. I did this probably about 2 years ago, where I preached a series on religious liberty. But the really interesting thing is, if you look at religious liberty and the struggle for religious liberty, that the high points of it are in prophecy as well. And so after you tell the story of religious liberty, then you can tell the story of prophecy. And when you tell the story of prophecy, you can say, well, that was just a little sliver of prophecy. Wouldn't you like to know more about what the book of Revelation and what the book of Daniel say? And so you can add one more layer to this whole thing, and that is God wrote us a love letter full of prophecies, and it all makes sense. It all fits together. And so now you can see how, I hope you can see how you can use religious liberty as a tremendous entering wedge. In fact, I've come to think that it's actually an integral part of the three angels' message, because what's going on? I mean, in the three angels' messages, it's talking about the beast power, which is forcing worship, right? So you have to preach religious liberty, or else the fact that there be any problem with forced religion, I mean, it just doesn't. Yeah, you can see the difference between Babylon and forced religion and the true church in Revelation is the difference between freedom of religion and not. That's one of the key components for what's going on in the book of Revelation. And so I think you can take all of this, you can weave it all together, and it's all part of the three angels' messages. And so that brings me around to what you asked, finally, the local church. So I've gone to a lot of local churches now and preached about religious liberty. And once in a while when I'm there, someone will come up to me and say, hey, I'm the religious liberty guy here at the church, right? And I love those people, but 9 out of 10 churches, they're the only person in the church that cares about religious liberty. And I would say most of the churches I go to and preach about religious liberty, nobody comes up to say that to me. So I don't know if they're just laying low or if they don't exist. But they probably, I'm guessing they probably don't exist. You could maybe answer that question more for me. But I think right now is the time to revitalize our religious liberty departments in the local churches to take advantage of this. And this also, I think, highlights something else I'd like to say about this as an evangelistic tool. And that is, it's really important that we get the religious liberty story right. Because there's a secondary religious liberty story that's out there. The devil has his counterfeit. And his counterfeit isn't based on the Bible. It's not based on Roger Williams. It's not based on the theology of the Protestants. It's not based on the Anabaptists. It's none of that. What it's based on is the French Revolution. Mm-hmm. And it's based on a throwing off of a religious oppression, but it doesn't replace it with true freedom. And it replaces it with an atheistic worldview. Anybody who's really studied the French Revolution and the real children of the French Revolution will realize that communism and socialism, these are the children of the French Revolution. And if you look at communism and socialism when it's implemented, it's anti-church. And right. So there's a difference between a religious liberty that is in favor of and can nurture and grow together with a church, which is the American system, or the French Revolution system, which is very anti-church and really leads to a bunch of atheism and destruction. And this is a real problem, because a lot of religious liberty people today will actually preach the French Revolution, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that version of religious liberty. And that's not the version of religious liberty that God gave us. And it's also nothing that's useful for evangelism.
That's right. The American version of separation of church and state and secularism is different from the French version of secularism, the laicite, which is very antagonistic to Christianity. And of course, the American one has become ever more antagonistic, but the French one is really rooted there where you're saying. So we really have different perspectives out there, multiple perspectives. And so we've talked about a Catholic perspective, 2 Protestant perspectives, and now coming and talking too about the different American versus the French. In the UN, the European French thing sort of, that's becoming the dominant thing. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights seems to be referred to a lot, even by our own people. And I think that's kind of that secondary line you're talking about, which isn't necessarily the true deal. So I want to come back around to this. Yeah, I want to come back around to this, but let me share something I've that a lot of people don't know it's here. So this is going to be a mic drop moment, maybe not, but this is the current edition of the church manual. So you're a member of your local congregation, perhaps, each one of us. Let me read to you a little item of some interest. This is on page 102 of the new well, it's not new. In a couple months we'll have the new one. But anyway, this is the 2022 edition. This is a section called Religious Liberty Associations. So you're a member of your local church. I bet you didn't know this. Each church is considered an informal religious liberty association, and every church member is considered a member of the association. The pastor or an elder is the chairperson. So when you became a member of the church, you probably weren't told that, but you would become a member of a local. That congregation is understood to be effectively a religious liberty association. So, yeah, it looks like there's a basis for us to be very interested. When one guy comes up and says, yeah, I'm the religious liberty guy here. Well, according to what the World Church perspective, at least indicated on page 102, is no, we're all religious liberty people. And so that means we should be adept at understanding the different perspectives on religious liberty, and we wouldn't be fooled by the wrong, the counterfeit, or the quasi-Protestant version, which really does not have the full benefit of the Anabaptist, the part that's rooted in Roger Williams and all that.
Yes, and what I found with the local churches and the local conferences is that they're good at dealing with Sabbath issues. When a member has a Sabbath issue, they're pretty good at that. But what they're doing is they know the mechanics, they know what the law says, and then they're good at supporting their members to get through the system and try to get an accommodation. And I think that they're very good at that, actually, especially at the conference level. But what's going on there is they're not learning any of that foundation, that basis that we talked about, where these beliefs come from. And so while I think it's important to support our members, they miss the evangelism that we could do. And so my vision would be for these religious liberty departments to become revitalized. And I think that with what's going on in the world today, what's going on in the United States today, it's a great time to do that. And we could find that these departments and these issues are actually important and effective at evangelism.
I mean, if we don't become revitalized in this area, it doesn't matter. I mean, those churches or those people who are becoming revitalized, they're going to be talking about this and doing and pitching their perspectives anyway. I mean, so basically we can either, watch all the buses go by and say, those guys are doing the religious liberty thing. We could do that. Or we can ourselves kind of get into the mix and help minds move in a direction that is more biblical and more truly liberty oriented. But instead, I think that there's kind of this antagonism, the Charlie Kirk thing, yes, he was super political with a certain political party and whatever. But I think that people are letting that sort of blind them to the opportunities that are here. And meanwhile, the Catholic, Protestant doesn't matter. We're all one. Let's all be one team. Everything's spinning down into disaster. So let's set all these things aside and let's just do what we can to revitalize, the culture. That's taking with every time that we don't become involved, that kind of perspective is getting a new boost. So we're basically contributing to a deepening of the religious liberty problem if we are not taking advantage of, if we're not participating in the dialogue that has arisen suddenly up here. But it seems as though we have sort of a siloed, atrophied, I don't know, I shouldn't probably say it that way, it seems as though there's maybe back up from those, but to say we have a small number of religious liberty people, but I think they're all talking to each other, maybe kind of in their own wind tunnel sometimes. And so if they're all kind of one certain maybe political perspective, they can't see how they can, they're just kind of keeping back. And meanwhile, the Catholic Protestant, hey, it doesn't matter, we're all one happy family. That's a dangerous theme, and I think that's growing right now in our culture. Meanwhile, we're missing yet another opportunity. We missed opportunities, I believe, very firmly during the C-19 business, the last five years, the global illness and treatment issue. But I think we missed great opportunities there. And now that there's a revived interest in religious pieces and religious liberty, are we just gonna miss that thing too? I mean, I remember years ago, you'd look at these health. I look at these health stores and say, man, this has gone wider than the church now, and now the hippies are all doing it. The post hippies, they have their health food stores, and they're going great guns with it. And we sort of we're missing opportunities there. Do we have to miss every opportunity, or can we stand up and sort of get on something while it's still growing?
At some point, the stones will cry out. And I'm utterly convinced that religious liberty is a key element of the Three Angels message. So if we keep missing this opportunity, like I said, at some point, the stones are going to cry out. I do think we really need to participate. One way that I think I spent some time philosophizing about this and mulling it around in my own head a little bit. And one of the ways that we've lost our ability to participate, I think, I could be wrong, but this is just, I'm tossing this out here as a hypothesis, is that we have our own school system from elementary and high school. I think in particular, that's what I'm concerned about. And so because of that, the religious right has had a lot of political experience in school boards. And we haven't participated there because we just don't. We emphasize our own school system instead. And so I think that the reason why I say that is that I think with what's going on and my experience and the little bit that I've seen is that we need to become a lot more adept at being able to talk to people in the political arena. And we also need to do it in a way where we don't feel like it's somehow taboo. I preached a sermon here recently, and I used the example of Jonah. Jonah goes to Nineveh to preach to Nineveh that if they don't change their ways, God's going to destroy them. So Jonah is actually preaching a morality to the Ninevites. But it's interesting what Jonah is not preaching. Jonah is not telling them that they have to become Jews. He's not doing that. Because when the Ninevites repent, they don't become Jews.
No.
And so you can see, and this brings, I realize our hours go so fast. There is a place where the church informs the government as to right and wrong and what it should do and what it shouldn't do. And Jonah is kind of an example of that. Jonah didn't go and tell the Ninevites how to worship. But Jonah did go and tell the Ninevites to quit acting like Sodom and Gomorrah. And I think as Adventists right now in our religious departments and the way we think, we've withdrawn from the political arena and we've chosen not to be relevant or say anything about anything except Sabbath. And we know that Sabbath is going to be a key issue. In fact, this is coming up. I mean, we're pretty close to where that's the only thing we're going to get to talk about anyway. But be that as it all may, I think for the rest of the world looking on, the Charlie Kirks of the world and stuff like that, they're watching the world turn to Sodom and Gomorrah. And in the process of seeing the world turn into Sodom and Gomorrah, that's the reason why they want a union of church and state. And so we need to learn how to participate in all this. So I think what I've done is I've just bitten off a few big issues, and we've only got 10 minutes left. But I just think that for religious liberty to be an evangelistic tool, and I think it definitely will be, we've got to be able to engage on all of these subjects. And we've got to be able to paint a picture of a loving God who cares about us. And look at how wonderful God is about the Ninevites. He could have gone in there and said, you know, it's really bad what you're doing to each other, acting like a bunch of Sodom and Gomorrah people. But what I really care about is that you worship Yahweh, right? That's not what he did. He went in there because he cared about the people. Because when you live like Sodom and Gomorrah, who's the victim? It's the average people. And that's what's happening in America today is we're watching our morality go to pieces. And who's the victim? It's the average people. And so we need to be able to present a picture of God that cares about the average people and that participates in the life of the average people, but that preserves freedom of worship.
Right.
And
by the way, we can easily go to 10 or 15 after or longer. We're not really constrained by the hour limit.
Okay.
But yeah, and by the way, I want to remind our viewers too, if you have questions, type them in and we'll look at them, or statements, you know, we'll kind of be participatory with you. So go ahead, Jonathan, though. I think that you're telling us the same thing, you know, that we're missing opportunities right now to modify the broader discussion to include more of the piece that people need to be hearing, instead of the quasi version, you know, like, well, we're gonna legislate this into you know, eventually, of course, we're gonna legislate. We're gonna do Sunday observance and give everybody, you know, a day of rest here, and we're gonna basically, you know, put incentives in for people to go to church on Sunday. And of course,
to me, it's really ridiculous, and it shows what's really the force behind all this, even though the people may not realize it. And that is, oh, we don't like trans story hour, so we're going to have Sunday laws. It's like, what? It's like, why don't you outlaw trans story hour? You know, it's like, but you don't, and they look at all of the ills of the world, and rather than dealing with those, well, let's have Sunday worship because that will fix it. It's like, no, that's not how it works for so many different reasons. But and this is where I think it's important for us not to be just like, well, the only thing we care about is Sunday worship, because they're coming to the table with real problems with the way society is organizing itself, and they're saying, well, we need to get back to God. So they look at the fentanyl crisis and say, we need to get back to God, so let's have Sunday worship. They look at trans, we need to get back to God, let's have Sunday worship, or, you know, different things like that. And we should be able to say, no, it's not really like that. Let's explain how the world really works and how God really works and what God is really interested in. And then we can talk about how to deal with fentanyl, for instance. And you'll find out that the solution for fentanyl isn't Sunday worship. And so there, you know, but in order to do that, we have to actually be able to really participate, and we have to be able to talk knowledgeably. This is one of those things where I'm realizing this requires you to be operating at a really high level of education and engagement. And honestly, the devil has done a good job of sidelining us on education and engagement in this area. And so we need to change that. I think what we need to do to make this work is at the very basic level, the local churches, the religious liberty people, I'm hoping can get a vision. I'm hoping that this podcast tonight will help spread a vision and then educate themselves. You know, Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun, right? And he's so right. I mean, God inspired that, right? I could say it's just as easily God said that. I'm listening to this debate with Project 2025, and I've listened to this Pastor Wilson, and he talks about these arguments for why we need to do this. And there's another guy too, I can't think of his name, that's saying we need to legislate all 10 commandments and everything. And I'm listening to them talk and the arguments that are being made. If the average Adventist will read one book and one book only, which is National Sunday Law by A.T. Jones, you will have all the answers to those arguments that these guys are making. they are making the identical arguments that were made in 1888 to try to pass the National Sunday Law, which A.T. Jones went and just laid it out, just all the arguments. So that would just be one place to get started. Now, I don't think learning A.T. Jones alone is going to be enough, but as an Adventist, get started, right? I think we do need to learn American history. I think we need to learn the history of Roger Williams. We need to learn why and how all the colonies got rid of their established churches. Because one of the things they'll say is, well, all the colonies had established churches when America came together. But what they're forgetting to tell you is that they'd gone into disuse, and that one of the first jobs that the people that gave us the Constitution did was to go home to their home states and get rid of establishment of churches and get rid of their established churches. They don't tell you that part. The same guys that were writing the Constitution were from Virginia, and they go back and immediately get rid of the church in Virginia as far as being part of the state.
Right, being supported, involuntarily supported by citizens.
Exactly. And so, because Virginia had an established church when we adopted the Constitution, absolutely. But that was because it was more important to get the Constitution done. And then 6 months later, they would go back and get rid of the establishment church, you know? And so it's like they give a bad history. So I guess what I'm saying is that start by reading A.T. Jones. You'll be amazed. You can become so relevant quickly in this conversation about that's going on with Project 2025. But I also think we need to do the deep work of understanding American history. And to people that are listening that are not in the United States, I would also encourage them to do the same thing. And you're like, why? Isn't that kind of like, I don't know, that almost sounds, I don't know, racist. Let me tell you why. America has definitely been the beacon of light on freedom around the world. Now that's waning and that's all changing. And we see that in prophecy. We knew that was going to happen in prophecy. It's obvious that this would be something that was temporary, right? Mm-hmm. But the reality is that we have been that beacon of light. And if you're from another country, the reason why you have the freedoms that you do have probably is because somebody looked to see how successful America was in doing that. And so America is still probably the source of your freedoms. And if you understand more about how America got those freedoms, you also understand the history of your own freedoms. It may not be as true for Europe, but it's going to be very true for the third world. And it's not everywhere, but that's something that happens a lot. And the other thing that I would urge too is that America really did. If you need to be able to understand the theological underpinnings of this, then Roger Williams is the fountainhead. And so, but he also, like I said, theologically, he's the first one to pull it off, but he stands in the shoes of and stands on the shoulders of the Anabaptists. I didn't realize that until I read his book. And he's
which book?
He's quoting him.
What's the title of the book?
Oh boy, the title's about 2 miles long. It's like the bloody history of persecution and how's it? We say it's short, just the bloody history. But it's a huge title. It's really long and it's a hard read. I'm going to tell you, I've read a lot of stuff. In college, I was an English lit major and I loved reading Shakespeare, right? Well, let me tell you something. His book's a hard read. I'm not saying everyone needs to read that book.
I wonder if somebody's done a modernized version, which normally I'm not really in favor of modernized versions, but if somebody could simplify the language a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of books I've read that come from the 1800s that have sometimes half a page is one sentence. It's like they bought a whole barrel of semicolons or paragraph,
exactly.
And the whole sentence goes on and on.
What I would say, if someone really wants to learn about Roger Williams, and I highly recommend it. I can't remember if the guy's name is Jonathan or John Barry. He wrote a book called Roger Williams. I think it's something like The Birth of the American Soul, something like that. It's the creation of the American soul, but excellent biography of Roger Williams and how he fits in. And I highly recommend it. I would start with what we know from Spirit of Prophecy and tell everyone to go study religious liberty from Spirit of Prophecy. follow that
Courage
up
to
with
Enlighten.
A.T. Jones.
Yeah.
And then I would follow that up with this book that I just suggested about Roger Williams. It's a fascinating, great read. And if you read that, boy, all of a sudden you're going to have a leg up on if you've done all of those things, you're going to have a leg up on everybody you meet nearly when you get into a conversation with them.
This fellow that's just been appointed by the government to be Solicitor General. I forgot what it's called. Isn't
I
his
think it's
name
Department
Barry?
of Labor is the guy you're thinking of.
Yeah, his name is Barry, isn't it? Like we're talking about two totally different people with a totally different perspective.
Yeah. I hope I'm not confusing something in my head. I could try to look it up, but maybe it's funny how your brain does funny things to you, and I don't have it
That was
sitting
just
here on my shelf
Amazon
right now.
a few minutes ago.
If you go to Amazon and just look up "Birth of the American Soul" or something like that, Roger Williams, "Birth of the American Soul." Yeah, let's get the right thing. I don't want to send people down the wrong path.
Let's see what we get here. No, not that. Roger Williams and the Creation of the American Soul, Church, State, and the Birth of Liberty, John M. Barry, Richard Poe, and so on.
Yeah,
Is that
it
maybe
wasn't
what
too far off.
No, you were pretty close. And then what's the Solicitor General guy? What's his name?
I don't remember. It's Department of Labor. I think
Department
is
of
the guy
Labor.
you're talking about.
And his name is Barry or something, isn't it?
It might be.
Okay, but I shouldn't search for it in Amazon. Let's try.
And I think he was one where I saw a thing where he said that, and I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but I'm pretty sure I saw him saying that we need to legislate all 10 commandments.
Well, this is kind of wild here. Jonathan Barry, confirmed as Solicitor of Labor. He is, in the Trump nominee for roles across federal government. So how about that? It looks like the name
Amazing.
is almost the same, and yet we're talking about two totally different people in two different times with two different perspectives, opposite in a critical point. It's fascinating that this
That is fascinating. And then they have a name like mine, Jonathan.
Yeah. Now watch out for the Jonathans, but the Zirkles hopefully are all right.
Yeah, Zirkle's a little uncommon.
So, but anyway, yeah, interesting the way that tunes out. Now, in terms of coming back into a practical, not that this is very practical, but coming back to a practical point in terms of on the local basis, if every member is a member of your local religious liberty association, and the pastor is too, by the way, the pastor probably doesn't know it, that he's the chairman of the board for this informal religious liberty association. Just like you didn't know you were a member of it, but there it is.
Right.
But if that's the case, when you talked about kind of using the current discussions as a bridge to getting over to Bible prophecy and increasing people's understanding there, how are you talking about, like using like the stories in Daniel chapters 1-6, Revelation 13? Is you're kind of talking about using that kind of that means of kind of moving into those areas, starting with some of the issues of liberty of conscience today, and then moving into the other spot for to increase interest?
Yeah, absolutely. Like
Okay.
I said, I did this this series where I just really covered religious liberty, and to the extent that I could, it was history. And so to the extent that the Bible played a role in history and everything like that, which it definitely does, I would weave it in, right? But it was more of the study. It was more of a study of what can I say, the history of the fight for religious liberty. And but then at the end I could take it and go like, oh, guess what? The Bible talks about this. It predicted this. And so then you can spend some time actually looking at different things in Revelation and showing how, this power would arise at this time and that kind of a thing. And so I think for me, what I am wanting to do is, if a church has an evangelistic program planned, this could be kind of like a pre-program. And I also think that it's going to draw a little bit different crowd than we normally draw. It has the potential to draw in people that are, what can I say? Well, let's just say that when I did do it, we had people from the Reagan administration, people that had worked for Ronald Reagan, in the audience eating it up. They loved it. They stayed the whole time, and so I think that I don't have enough experience with this to be able to predict anything other than
Sure.
I really believe that that's what the Holy Spirit is. It's leading me to look into this more, and I'm hoping to. What I'd really like to do is put it together in a way where, and now I'm just kind of like I hate making promises about what I'm trying to do, but I would like to put it together in a way kind of like so there's a set of slides and other people could present it, you know.
Yeah.
And so then your local religious liberty department, you know, they could host this. They don't need to like invite me to come do it. But they really ought to go to the trouble to really understand it before they try to host it, because if they don't understand it really well, and you get somebody who's a guest there, and they're all like, but well, I got a question about this, or I got a question about that, and you're like, I don't know, you know, you'd be a lot better off. It would behoove you to do a little reading before you get there.
Yeah,
You
it
know?
would be good if there was kind of a basic course, like to get people rolling in the right direction, because I think we have a tendency to, you know, here's our 18 different departments, and this guy's the religious liberty guy. So, you know, I really don't know that much. I'm going to hand it off to him, and he may, you know, he may be on track, but my sense from reading and listening to some of our religious liberty people is that they're not really exactly tracking with what you're talking about.
No, they're not. In fact, I think we're late in the show now, so I'm gonna be confident that the kind of person who's still watching it is the conscientious person who cares a lot, because I'm going to say something now that will probably make some people upset. But I've said this before in other public places, and that is this. At the general conference session, I was in the booths and I was talking to someone from the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Department booth.
Is this, by the way, the recent GC session?
Yeah, this is the one that just happened a few months ago.
Okay. The one in which you weren't really a delegate.
I wonder why. I was not a delegate.
You
don't need to go not there. A delegate at all.
Yeah,
but I was there, and I wanted to talk to some people at Parle, and I'm talking to them, and I talked to one of them, and I say, you know, I've been watching what's being produced by Parle, and the arguments you guys make, and the documents you produce, and things like that. And I said, it's all UN stuff. It's all based on. I said, really, it's the French Revolution. I said, there's two kinds of religious liberty. There's American, and then there's this UN/French Revolution version of it. And it was interesting because this was, you know, I didn't know how he was going to respond, but his response to me is, I know there are two different versions of it, and I know that we use the one you're talking about. And I said to them, well, why would you do that? And he said, well, because it's more effective around the world. People pay attention to what the UN has to say, and we actually have more success with this when we get problems. And I'm all like, really? I said, but if that's really true, you don't have any ability to use this for evangelism. You can't help with that. I'm like, you should be preaching the truth and not some UN version of religious liberty, even if it isn't as, quotes, effective at maybe getting the religious crisis taken care of that you're dealing with. I said, you really need to do the truth. And you can see, I mean, he spent some time thinking about it, you know, and that turned into a long conversation between me and him. But the reason why I tell this, and the reason why I think this is important for that conscientious person that's listened this deep, is that I think if you go to your religious liberty department and you look up into the conference, which will then look to the union, which will then look to the general conference, be careful, because you might be getting the wrong version of religious liberty if you do that. And this is one of those things where nobody would tell you that when you join the Adventist church, you should let someone else interpret the Bible for you. Well, don't let someone else interpret religious liberty for you either, because really it's a theological issue. And with theological issues, you have to have your own faith. And you really shouldn't just go blindly to anyone for that, any more than you would for a Bible doctrine.
Right. Yeah, and if every congregation is, as I read, you know, an informal religious liberty association, which is almost like even news to me, What is it? Each church is considered an informal religious liberty association, comma, and every church member is considered a member of the association. Well, okay. If that's the case here, then there's a basis for a local church, local revival in your local congregation, and we can get more people stirred up in studying out these themes, and maybe we'll have a broader range, a deeper thought rather than just sometimes some superficial. So the UN gives us the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And you know, when you read that big declaration with all those many statements, and then you get to I think it's the last one, or I think it's the last one, 29 or whatever number the last one is. It basically, the whole thing is thrown into the wastebasket right there. It's like, oh, and by the way, anything that basically, as we interpret it, if it doesn't match the intentions of the UN, then then it's not this. So it's kind of like, whatever the current perspective of the UN is really more meaningful than the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that they've supposedly stand on. And I've sat just this summer, I sat in our religious liberty presentation at camp meeting, and there were our religious liberty leaders for the union, that particular union, and they were quoting the UN Declaration of Human Rights as a foundation, a foundation piece for our religious liberty. Well, that's a different line than the Anabaptist line that you're talking about, and that the early Adventists really leaned on. They weren't. There was no universal UN Declaration of Human Rights. And if there had been, I think we would have heard some interesting analysis about it from A.T. Jones.
No, actually, I hate to say this, but I think there was something. When I give a talk on the French Revolution, there's something called the Declaration of the Rights of Man.
Yeah, French Revolution.
And that I think is the
more of a
predicate
precursor
for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I think it's based on that same thing.
That's interesting. Okay, yeah, I'll have to.
I'd have to go back and study my pedigree. I'm just trying to become better at American history. Now I got to add European history.
Well, so let's kind of work towards wrapping up here.
Sure.
So we've talked today about there are different perspectives on religious liberty, not only in the broader world outside of the church, but within even the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which we're both members of. One perspective is more of an Anabaptistic perspective, radical Reformation perspective. And then there's another perspective, which is, I don't know really quite how to tag it. I'm sure that people are well-meaning, but it's kind of a perspective on religious liberty, which really seems like we're limited to Sabbath issues. And even there's some differences. But it's sort of a pro-UN. I don't know. I'm hesitant to frame it that way. But there's sort of a...
I would call it put your head in the sand version of religious liberty.
Okay, that's pretty.
We could call it the ostrich religious liberty
ostrich version. So that you're only looking, your range of topics is very narrow. We're not going to talk about this topic, but we are going to talk when there's this little slice here. It's a Sabbath issue, which is not to demean it. Sabbath is a very important issue. Yeah, we're going to deal with that somewhat. But over here, all these other big issues, we're not going there. We're just going to do, if they tell us to stand on a dot, we're going to stand right there on that dot. If they tell us to put the mask on, we're going to put the mask on, and so forth. That seems like it's a very constrained. It's really not liberty of conscience. It's really kind of it's picking out a particular slice.
Well,
and then
I think if you look at
it up to basically the global, whatever the global little leaders want to impose down, we're going to just do what they say. That's not.
I think you've kind of hit on something, because I think what that really is, it's a way of telling the laity, don't do anything unless we tell you to. And so it's a way of saying, just we saw this with the pandemic. It was like, don't do anything we don't tell you to do.
Right. And yet the whole congregation is an informal religious liberty association. Every church,
Oh,
your church,
absolutely.
at the
And
pandemic.
that idea of don't do anything unless we tell you to, I mean, that is a top-down religious organization that is that's the basic formula for popery.
Yeah.
For the papacy, you know. And so
we could do better than that. By
absolutely.
By miles.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I was blessed to be in April at a certain meeting. I won't name it all out, but there was a conference officer in that meeting, and it was a religious liberty meeting, and he stood up and all the people were gathered there, a pretty good group, and he stood up and just plainly apologized to that group of members, church members, constituents, attendees. Apologized that the conference hadn't stood in the right place, in his opinion, nor in my opinion, during some of these events these past 5 or 6 years. He just said, we were wrong and we failed you. Please forgive us and help us to do better.
You know, if that
so that took a lot. It shouldn't have, but that I think that was a bold thing to do and a needful thing to do. I think that generates trust.
Absolutely.
And I have yet to see that happen on a larger basis than that. But anyway, there it was.
I think if that man did that in the most public way possible, he would be shocked. No, what I mean really public, like get out there in the Adventist media, you know, beyond this podcast, beyond podcasts, you know, do it in writing. I think he would be shocked at how much respect and love he would get from the people that felt wronged by the conference.
Well, he's a good man, and I'm glad to be working very right with him. So praise the Lord. Anything else you want to say, Jonathan, before we finish off? Is there kind of a lay religious liberty group or a way to build on some of these kind of things we're talking about today? A group we can connect to?
So I want to finish it off with just a little bit of a teaser.
Okay.
I am working right now on trying to put together a supporting ministry of the church that is religious liberty. And I'm not sure exactly what that looks like. However, what I do know is that if you look at the pastoral documents, the founding documents, the Constitution and things that say what it should be doing, they're excellent.
Go way back to the late 1800s.
But you can even see what's written on the books today. It's still excellent.
Yeah, it's in the working policy today.
The problem is the execution of it. And I think that, you know, we have these for health. We have supporting ministries that are worried about the execution of the Adventist health message. And I think we need this for religious liberty. So I'm working on that. And I think you're going to hear more for that, although I'm trying not to be too ambitious. I have a lot of ambition for the Lord's work, but I like to under promise and over deliver. So you'll hear a little bit about that. But the one thing though that I would like I'm hoping to get out really quick. I've already started to do a lot of work on it. I would say we're about 75% there. I have engaged in this thing for a number of years now where myself and someone else will reenact A.T. Jones in front of Congress. And what I'm trying to do is put it together in a small little sharing pamphlet, kind of polish it up, make it a little easier to do. And I would love to see this little sharing pamphlet get spread like the leaves of autumn so that the Adventists can understand the basic arguments on the Sunday law. And I also would encourage them to reenact it themselves. It's been amazing. I talked to some of the attorneys that I've done it with, and as we're watching with Project 2025, we're all like, oh, I know the answer to that argument. Oh, I know the answer to that one. And we're quick on it. And the reason why is because we reenacted it. And so, and it's not that people are going to all be drawn in front of Congress, but when stuff gets in front of Congress, you talk to your neighbor about what's going on in front of Congress too, you know? And so in the American political system, you end up chatting locally about what's going on nationally and being able to answer that. So look for that little booklet. I don't know what we're going to title it, but It'll be something like, I don't know what it will be. We'll have to figure that out. So I would encourage people. I think that there'll be something coming along for lay people very quickly. It could be as simple as a web page with book titles to read to educate yourself. I think something like that is something we can get up really actually fairly quickly. And just having this conversation today, I realized how important that is.
Maybe a layman's course too on religious liberty, some of this history business, like some of the resources you mentioned. Also, it sounds like we really need we may need, if it doesn't exist, kind of I don't want to say simplified, but a Roger Williams version of his book that is readable by people who, who if you don't keep their attention for 62 or 63 seconds, they're going to click on something. We need something that's readable by people who have, a pretty high attention span, expectation, and pretty low attention span, which is probably all of us, some more than others, but I think we're all suffering from that. And our attention span is not increasing, it's shrinking,
Right.
God forbid. Yeah. Well, thank you, Jonathan. This was very interesting because this kind of pulled this together kind of in the last minutes, the last day or so, or 2 days. And we have you, I think, coming back here very soon with another related topic. So we're going to keep on with that. But with all of our traveling, things are a little scrappy right now. But anyway, thank you for this. It's been very interesting to me because, when you start a podcast, you don't really know where the road's going necessarily unless you're like super rigid. And that's definitely not the way I do a podcast. So this has been very informative to me and hopefully to our viewers and listeners. So
well, thank you
for sharing.
I really enjoyed it. So thank you.
All right. Very good. Thanks, everybody. I don't know if next Sunday, we may or may not have a podcast, but after that, we should get regular back with every Sunday night. And if I can, I'll do one Sunday night next week too. So anyway, thanks for joining in. Put in some comments so YouTube knows this is interesting, and we'll see you next Sunday for the Remedial Protestantism podcast, or maybe this Sunday after.